Well, greetings to all of you this morning. Let's see here. It is a blessing to be here, blessing to get together to fellowship, to worship, and to edify one another this morning in this way. Thank you, Brother Jonas, for leading out and just praising God in song. We all came here from our respective homes, backgrounds. Preconceived notions of what God is and who He is, but I trust we're all here for one purpose, and that is to seek Him, to know Him. Many of us, probably most of us here, come from some sort of religious background, where we were taught how to think and what we should think and how we were supposed to worship God, sometimes in great detail, how that was supposed to look. And not all of that was bad, but it was not all healthy either. So we want to just take away all of that and just come to the core of who we are. Why are we here? Who is this great God that we serve? And how is it that I can know Him and I can enter into that fellowship with Him? Who is this Jesus that He sent to redeem us? How is it that I can come into His presence boldly? I have a burden this morning. When I look around at much of what is or what claims to be Christianity. And I'd like to talk a little bit this morning about humanism. And what is humanism? And how does that look in our lives? Humanism is an outlook or system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine or supernatural matters. Humanist beliefs stress the potential value and goodness of human beings, emphasize common human needs, and seek solely rational ways of solving human problems. We live in a land where it is okay to be called Christian. And many people would say that it was founded on Christianity. And I'd like to look at that just a little bit. But first of all, I'd like to tell you a little story. Back in about 330-some BC, Alexander the Great became king of Greece. And he is well known. He is considered one of the top 10 military strategists of the world. And he went on to conquer most of the known world of that day. Now, Alexander himself was tutored under a well-known philosopher that most of us today would probably still know his name, and that was Aristotle. And he was taught all the ways of Greece and Greek philosophy and what that was all about and what was important to Greece. And when Alexander went out to conquer the world, he was not satisfied with simply conquering the world and bringing them under his subjection, but his goal was to propagate Greek culture. And he emphasized the need for the lands that he conquered, for them to learn the Greek language and to learn Greek culture. And much of that didn't happen until after his death, but it began what is known as the period of Hellenism in the ancient world, or the teaching of Greek and Greek culture. And we are, to this day, in many ways, more than we realize, we are to this day still influenced, very highly influenced by that culture. And for that reason, because this was important to Alexander the Great, and he passed that on to the people after him, and they taught this throughout the whole world. And I believe, one of the things that God used that in was that we know that the original New Testament was written in the Greek language. The reason for that was because Alexander the Great made sure that this was taught in all the lands. So many, many people, this was the trading language of their day. And so it made it easy for the gospel to spread because it was the language at that time was like English is today. Everybody in the world either knew it or wanted to know it. And so he influenced not only the world of his day, but he influenced very highly even the world we live in today. Now let's fast forward to where we are today. We have, like I said earlier, we live in a land that many times claims to be Christian. But I believe if we could look back at some of the roots, we would see that it is rooted in humanism, not Christianity. One of the founding philosophies, one of the founding thoughts, ideas, was human rights. And one of those one of those rights, or one of a phrase or whatever that is very common, or where a lot of that was based on, was that every human being has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The question I have, is that Christianity or is it humanism? And I'd like to look a little bit at the difference there. So what we also, in our day, in our lives, we could look back at where it talks about Daniel and the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and he saw the world and the world histories and all the kings of the world, and Alexander the Great was in that, and his predecessors were in that, or his successors, I should say, were in that line very clearly. But then there is, in the end, there is this, how does it say, this rock that was hewn out of the mountain, and it destroyed all the kingdoms of this world, and it covered the whole world. And that kingdom that it's talking about there is the kingdom that we are a part of, the kingdom of Christ. We are a part of a kingdom. This is not a democracy. This is not by the people for the people. This is by the king, for the king. And so, with that, what often happens, we find ourselves let's just look at a few verses here. I'd like to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 5. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, well actually, verse 5 is kind of the key verse, but I want to read a little bit more than that. Starting in verse 3, for though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ, and having in readiness to revenge all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. So we have here the thought that we're bringing even down to every thought, to the obedience of Christ, the King. We don't have the right to just think our own thoughts and make up our own ideas and ways. Even every thought is to be brought to the obedience of the King. And even us, I was talking about Alexander the Great and how he influenced the world of his time and even to us today. We too are to influence the world. Christ the King is conquering the world, and he is not content until not only everything is brought into his subjection, but he also wants to see this culture being propagated throughout the whole world. So we have this same responsibility in our day, and we have this same privilege as what those under Alexander the Great in his time, to take this culture and spread it throughout the whole world. Many times, the question is, our gospel Christ-centered or man-centered? Many times we lose focus of Christ and we focus on the needs of humanity. There's a verse in John chapter 12, verse 24. And there again, I want to read a little bit before that, because it's kind of an interesting context here, considering what I just shared about Alexander the Great and the Greek culture. So the context here is, chapter 12, let me see, starting in verse 20. It says, and there were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. The same came therefore to Philip, which was of Bethsaida of Galilee, and desired him, saying, Sir, we would see Jesus. So here there were certain Greeks that came to Jesus, and they wanted to see Jesus. And this is the context in which this was written, in which Jesus said these words. These Again, Greek was kind of the dominant culture of that day. Greek philosophy, Greek thought, that was kind of the dominant culture. And so he comes and he says he wants to see Jesus. And Philip tells Andrew, and Andrew and Philip tell Jesus. And what was Jesus' response to that? And Jesus answered them, saying, The hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall in the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. If any man serve me, let him follow me, and where I am, there shall also my servant be. If any man serve me, him will my Father honor. Now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, but for this cause came I unto this hour. Father, glorify thy name. Jesus had a purpose on this life, and he had a place where he was going. And if we want to be with him, we must also follow that same path. There is no other way. We must die. Philippians chapter 2 talks about Jesus' steps down. Down, down, down. He was God, and he was not afraid to come and live among us, to be called a man, to live like a man, to live in obedience to his Father, to be humbled, even to the death of the cross. And then it says, Wherefore God hath also highly exalted him, that every knee should bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Not exact words, but paraphrase there. And we too, if we want to stand in that place with Jesus, we must follow that same path. There was someone else that came and offered Jesus another path. If we look at Matthew chapter 4, I'm not going to go there, I'm just going to talk about it a little bit, is where Jesus was tempted in the desert, and Satan came to him, and he took him to a high place, and he showed him all the kingdoms of this world, and he says, You bow down to me, and I'm going to give this all to you. And we could go into the details of the legalities of all of that, but I'm not going to go there. Not that that wouldn't be a good study, but he wanted to offer him all of this without going through that process of death. I am concerned that most of what is called Christian counsel, Christian seminars, whatever it might be, want to take you that same detour. Offering happiness, peace, without going through that death. Where man is the center and our happiness is the focus. Are we going to fall for it, or are we going to reject it? And many times, on the surface, it can look very similar. Self-esteem or death to self. Humanism teaches self-esteem. Christ teaches death to self. When self is dead, it's out of the way. I'm no longer hindered by its whims and its desires and its discontentments. When self-esteem rules, it's I pump myself up to make myself believe I am somebody. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about, just in closing here, I'd like to talk a little bit, Revelations chapter 3, Jesus talks to the church at Laodicea. And this is where the hope lies. This is where we can find this victory that we are looking for. You know, you might ask, well, doesn't Jesus want me to be happy? I didn't say that he doesn't want you to, but he has a certain path that you must follow in order to come to that place. I could also look at Hebrews chapter 1. Hebrews chapter 1 says, verse 8 and 9, "But unto the Son he saith, Thy throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of thy kingdom. Thou hast loved righteousness and hated iniquity. Therefore God, even thy God, hath anointed thee with the oil of gladness above thy fellows." Because he loved righteousness and hated iniquity, he was anointed with the oil of gladness above his fellows. The question I have is, do we really love righteousness and hate iniquity? Or do we just want the benefits of righteousness and we don't like the consequences of iniquity? And there's a big difference there. And I could go into that, and I don't want to belabor that. But I want to go to Revelation chapter 3, to the Laodiceans, where he says, "And unto the angel of the church of Laodicea," verse 14, "write, These things saith the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of the creation of God. I know thy works, that thou art neither cold nor hot. I would thou wert cold or hot. So then, because thou art lukewarm, and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth, because thou sayest, I am rich, and increase with goods, and have need of nothing. And knowest not that thou art wretched, and miserable, and poor, and blind, and naked. I counsel thee to buy of me gold, tried in the fire, that thou mayest be rich, and white raiment, that thou mayest be clothed, and that the shame of thy nakedness do not appear, and anoint thine eyes with eye salve, that thou mayest see. As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Be zealous, therefore, and repent. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come to him, and will sup with him, and he with me. To him that overcometh will I grant to sit with me in my throne, even as I also overcame, and am set down with my Father in his throne. He that hath an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches." They were rich in their eyes, increased with goods, and in need of nothing. But he said they were poor and naked and blind. And he said, "Buy of me gold that's been tried in the fire." We want to shun that fire. We want to skirt around it. But he says, go buy it. Go out and look for it. Gold that's been tried in the fire. We must take that same path as Jesus took. There's no shortcut to lasting happiness and peace. Well, there's much more I could say, but I don't want to take too much time away from the brothers either. I just feel like we need to we are so heavily influenced by the world around us and the thoughts and the philosophies of our day. And if we could just brush all of that aside, come to the core of Christianity, and follow the path that Jesus laid out for us. The path of death to self. And that's how he won the victory. And that too is the path that we must take. He says there in Philippians 2 that let this mind be in you. We should think those thoughts. That's the way we should think. So the Lord bless you. I trust that made sense to you. I feel like there's so much more that could be said, but I'm going to leave it at that for now. God bless you.